everyone to Bounce Off a SlamBall podcast. My name is Sam Roberts. You can find me on social media at Quantum Roberts, QUANTUM Roberts. And you are listening to or watching on YouTube the number one SlamBall podcast in the world with our final 2023 full SlamBall season preview for Summer Season 6 live in Las Vegas tonight as you're watching this, July 21st. If I go totally loopy during this episode, it is currently 2:30 a.m. July 21st for me, and that's just because my time management skills suck, and also I'm preparing for what my first weekend of SlamBall action is going to be, which is a lot of late nights and a lot of early mornings, but that's because we love this sport. If you're watching this, you're invested in the league, or you want to know why you should get invested in the league, and I am the guy to help you get there, okay? So, we've done previews for every single team. I highly suggest you go back and check those out, no matter how irrelevant they have since become, because players have moved around and positions have changed. But the core stuff is still there, who these players are, what the league is about, and what we can sort of look into the background of these players for, that's still there. Obviously, the intangibles aren't, but that's what the actual sport is for, and I'm excited to get into that with all of you, and just on my own time as well. But today's episode, today's 2023 preview, is going to be on the rules of the league. Not all of them, but I did get a complete breakdown of all of the SlamBall rules for this summer season 6, and I want to go through some of the main ones with you, including structure of the court, things like scoring, and also a slight gripe I have with the way they're doing penalties this year. In the world of SlamBall, they're called face-offs. I have a slight gripe with it, but I've already justified why they're doing it the way that they're doing it. We're going to have my personal team power rankings, okay? Part of me wants to say, this means nothing. This is just how I look at the 8 teams that make up the SlamBall League and how I order them in terms of 1 through 8, okay? Part of me wants to say that means nothing. The other part of me wants to be cocky as hell and say that no one's done more research into this league than me, and as a result, this is the number one SlamBall podcast in the world's opinion on the power rankings for teams. Weekend 1, I could be proven totally wrong. Teams could get injuries, players who I thought were going to excel might struggle out the gate, and things could be totally different, but this is how I see things, and we'll get into that, and we'll get into my reasons why. Every team's good, but there's a balance issue. We're going to get into my personal season predictions as well. That's stuff like what I expect to be big throughout the year, what I think teams are going to focus on throughout the year, and just how I think the sport of SlamBall is going to be played in 2023. And then we're going to end in some fun. We're going to end in my personal all-star predictions. That's a prediction for stopper, handler, 2 gunner positions, and also we're going to have my prediction for 5th man of the year, and a little bit of a conversation about things like defensive player of the year, leading scorer, and MVP, all things that I know the league wants to do. They're just not sure what sort of specific categories they're looking at doing yet. But we'll talk a little bit about those as we get in. As I say, if I go totally insane by the end of this episode, just know that it was worth it. I've got a mug of root beer, and we're ready to go. That's right, there's root beer even in Scotland. It's not great root beer, but it exists. Okay, I said we're starting with the rules, and we're starting with some specifics of the rules, okay? First things first, I want to fight the owner of SlamBall, Mason Gordon, not legitimately, but this episode, this show is called Bounce Off. If you don't know, in SlamBall, every half begins with what's referred to as like an inverse tip-off. So in basketball, you throw the ball up, and once it reaches its height, the players have an opportunity to try and hit it to their side. They used to have what was called the bounce off, which is where they would bounce it off the floor, and once it reaches its height, that's when you can try and get the ball. For this new year, and after I started this show, Mason Gordon changed the name of it, and it's now called a throwdown. So every game is going to start with a throwdown, and the second half is going to start with a throwdown. You heard me say half there. SlamBall is played with 4 5-minute quarters. Each of those has got a running clock, basically meaning that the time does not pause, except for a face-off, which is a 1v1, 1 defender versus 1 offensive player, and happens after certain fouls. On timeouts, of which there are only 2 per game, 1 for each team in the last quarter of play, and then also in the last minute of the game on the referee's whistle. So if the referee has to make a call in the last minute of game time, the clock will stop then. Otherwise, and unless it's a timeout or a face-off, constant running clock. Something that's big for this new season that they didn't have in any of the prior seasons, that's 2002, 2003, 2007, 2008, 2012 or 2016, something they did not have that has been introduced to the world of SlamBall is a 4-point line, okay? So the way that scoring is going to work in SlamBall is, if you dunk the ball, that includes you have to get your fingers on the rim, you get 3 points for that, okay? Any other shot that comes from within the trampolines, the tramps, whatever you want to call that area, those are worth 2 points. If you take a shot from outside the trampolines, but within the 4-point line, that's going to be worth 3 points. And if you take a shot from outside the 4-point line, that will obviously be worth 4 points. You might be asking, what's the significance of a 4-point line? What's the size? Significance-wise, it just means that you can score. You know, if one team's getting a lot of dunks and you're getting a lot of 4 points, that's, you know, more points on the board for your team. It can be a big offensive shift change. If one team's got an 8-point lead and the other team hits 2 4s, all of a sudden it's a tied game, and that can change things around very fast. The 4-point line is 26 feet back from the basket, okay? Traditional NBA distance for the 3-point line is 23 feet. Those extra 3 feet can make a lot of difference unless you're an elite level shooter. Some teams are using the 4-point line, but from what I've heard, a lot of them are still focusing on fundamental SlamBall action, which is straight to the rim. But the 4-point line may come into play, especially because it's modern era basketball that we're talking about here. You know, a lot of players who think they're distant shooters or want to be distant shooters or are in fact distant shooters. Some of the guys in this league have nice percentages from distance, and it wouldn't be strange to see them make use of the 4-point line, okay? Another thing I want to touch on, just around specifics and basics. The rims, the basketball hoops, are 10 feet above the ground, okay? I want to say that because that's standard for most professional basketball, whether you're in Europe or in America or wherever, right? 10 feet is the standard. But I want to say that because I want to put perspective in your minds when these guys are jumping into the air off the trampolines, seeing how much height they get, and just know, right, so the thing they're dunking on is 10 feet up. Cool. Glad I have that knowledge now. We now want to talk about the tramps. So the trampoline area is obviously very key of SlamBall. If you've jumped into this and you're like, I have no idea what SlamBall is, first of all, check out my first ever podcast on this channel, or you know, wherever you're finding this, which is all about the basics of SlamBall. What is it? But in essence, it's full contact basketball with 4 trampolines underneath each basket. Okay. The tramps are a key part. It's the equivalent of the painted area in basketball. And within them, you have a scoring trampoline, which is directly underneath the basket. Then you have 2 side tramps and you have a front tramp, okay? In between all of them, there's a thing called the island, which is a raised strip of padding, which players can also jump onto, okay? You cannot go from that island directly into the scoring tramp. That's the one underneath the basket. You can't go directly into there. But what you can do from the island is you can jump backwards into any of the other trampolines to then make a play on the hoop. Or you can act as a handoff player. So you're allowed to be on the island for 3 seconds. And if you're on the island for 3 seconds, you can distribute the ball to your teammates who might be jumping off left or right, or just you can make passes in the air or even kick it back out to 3-point or 4-point distance and really create separation and space for your teammates. So that's what the island is usually used for. In terms of defensively, defenders also can't be on the island for more than 3 seconds. And it used to be you could take what's called a charge. If you're not a basketball fan, a charge is when the defender is totally stationary, they're not moving, and the offensive player jumps into them. That's a bad move on the offensive player's terms, and the defense would get the ball, okay? There are no charges in SlamBall anymore. There used to be on the island and in the open floor. They've taken those away, but there is a balance in that it's not so that any contact is bad for the defender. It just means they don't get that benefit of being able to take a charge, okay? And I think this is all just to speed up the game a little bit and to create some crazy highlights, because you end up having a lot more guys getting dunked on, and then the team that made the dunk still gets the points. Another thing you need to know about the trampoline situation is players can't jump from the floor into that scoring tramp while they've got the ball directly, okay? There's a little bit of court space behind the basket, and players can move through there so long as they're not coming into contact with the stopper, which is the main defensive player on the other team. If they brush against them, that's okay, but if they're interfering, they're not allowed to do that. Players can cut into that bottom tramp, the scoring tramp, the one under the basket, and receive the ball from teammates. But what they can't do is dribble into that area. You have to come from a front tramp or a side tramp and then into the scoring tramp, or just from front and side and ignore that bottom trampoline altogether. But you can't go with ball from floor into bottom tramp. Okay. A big thing this season is you can't dive on loose balls in and around the trampoline area, okay? A stopper cannot cross the island to get a loose ball. If they go from trampoline to trampoline, that's okay if they're trying to retrieve a loose ball, but you can't dive across the island space. You also can't dive from outside the tramps into the tramps to try and receive a loose ball if you're on the offensive side, okay? Once a shot's been taken, if it hits the rim, only the players from the offensive side that were already in the trampolines, they're the only ones that are allowed to go after loose balls, okay? If you're outside the tramps, you can't dive in to try and get it. You can lean down and pick it up if you want to, but you can't jump into the tramps to try and get it, okay? I think a lot of these sorts of rules, particularly these ones about diving on loose balls, are just to try and prevent any large-scale injuries from happening, because you know when people start diving, it can be a lot of contact with the knees, and especially in a surface where it's obviously bouncy, not only the knees of the people that are getting dived at, but the people making the dives could get trampled on, and SlamBall really wants to avoid that as much as possible. We want it to be exciting, they want it to be physical, they don't want to cause a lot of unnecessary injuries, okay? Players cannot be hit when they're entering the tramps. This is a big thing going back to the first season of SlamBall. If a defensive player tries to hit an offensive player when both feet have left the ground and they're on their way into the tramps, that would be a foul against the defense and would result in what we were talking about earlier, a face-off. A key thing to note about this, defensive players are allowed to make hits on the offense as soon as they start dribbling the basketball, okay, or the SlamBall, right? The issue of them leaping into the trampolines only becomes an issue when both of their feet leave the ground, okay? If one foot's still planted, you can hit them, it's fine. But you have to time that right, and that can be difficult. There's also a thing called the popcorn rule, which is essentially that defenders can't try and purposefully mess up an offensive player's bounce in the trampolines, okay? You can't follow a guy into the trampolines because you know that that's going to disrupt their bounce and disrupt how much height they get. You just aren't supposed to do that, okay? I don't know if that's a danger thing or if that's just, it's to try and keep the game fast. But basically you can't do that. Movement around the spring beds has to be facilitated with passes, dribbles, or what's called freestyles, okay? By this I mean if you're going from one trampoline to the next, you need to bounce the ball off of the trampoline at some point. That counts as a dribble. You need to pass it to someone and then receive the pass back, obviously passing. Or a very unique thing to SlamBall, which is called freestyling. Now, freestyling is when you're in the air with the ball. The key thing with this trampoline thing is you cannot have possession of the ball in 2 consecutive trampolines, right? That means holding the ball while you land. What you can do is while you're in the air from the first trampoline, you can release the ball in the air and then bounce off the second trampoline and catch the ball again on the way back up, okay? That means that you've been in 2 trampolines, but you've only had possession of the ball in 1. And that means you can create some fun plays in the air. And it was really good to be able to read how that's written by the SlamBall League and better understand the concept of freestyling. Here's a little bit about the rest. We already talked about defenders are allowed to tackle or make blocks on players as soon as they dribble the ball. If a player gets hit while they're dribbling, their dribble resets. So in basketball, you're not allowed to dribble the ball, pick it up, and then dribble again. That's a double dribble. You're not allowed to run with the ball. That's a travel. You can't do that in SlamBall either, but that gets changed if you get tackled. Okay, if someone hits you, you're allowed to dribble again because that's considered a stoppage of your dribble. Okay. Similarly, we talked about you're not allowed to tackle when they're going into the tramps. You're also not allowed to tackle in a dangerous manner, right? Tackles have to be face on. The way that is phrased is it's in front of the shoulders. So if you come from the side, I'm not entirely sure what that means. Like side on is bad, but 45-degree angle, we'll have to wait and see how that's applied. But front onto the shoulders is the goal. And the tackles have to be above the waist, but below the neck, okay? Again, avoiding any dangerous leg injuries or any sort of damage to the neck and head area. Part of this, the league has done a really good job of they've introduced new health and safety protocols, okay? They want to be as safe for the players as possible, and that includes a lot of protective equipment, padded vests underneath the jerseys, padded helmets, which famously just fly off at the hint of contact, but they're there to try and prevent any major damage to the head, and then elbow and knee pads, as well as ankle braces and things that players will wear to make sure that their ankles are safe going into the trampolines. There's also a concussion protocol for any head injuries sustained on the floor, daily health and safety screenings, and then the whole league has what's called a taxi squad. That's basically 4 reserve players that can be put onto any team that suffers an injury. Okay, those teams can then choose to keep the taxi players long term if they want, or if they don't want to, they can, once their player's healthy, they can take the taxi squad player back to the taxi squad. Okay, it'll be interesting to see how teams rotate throughout the season, if they pick up little injuries here and there, and if teams realise that they're missing certain bits and pieces, right? One thing that I want to note as well is that blocking in the trampoline area has to be a play on the ball, right? So if you're the stopper, the main defensive position, right, and you're trying to make a block on someone dunking, you have to be trying to get the ball. You're not allowed to go body to body. You are allowed to go body to body, but your goal can't be just to hit the guy in the air. You've got to be trying to hit the ball. You're also allowed to stop the ball. Any shot that's taken from within the trampolines, you can knock it away. Any shot that comes from outside the trampolines, once it's reached its peak and it's on the way down, you can't touch that ball. You can't stop that from going in. That's what's called goaltending, and it's treated as if the ball went through the hoop anyway. Okay, so you're just giving the other team points that they might not have had if the shot had missed. Okay, you need to wait for it to come down. The one gripe that I have with these new rules, I need a quick drink of root beer, that's my one gripe. The one gripe that I have, I was talking about face-offs. So all the sort of rules we were talking about tackling someone as they enter the trampolines, blocking someone coming in sideways rather than straight up and down, tackling someone below the waist or in a dangerous manner or not front on. A lot of the fouls that occur in SlamBall result in what's called a face-off. Face-off is where the defensive player that made the foul has to start next to their basket. The offensive player runs at the basket and it's one-on-one trying to score. Whatever happens, the offensive team then gets the ball back. Remember, in SlamBall, you can get 3 points for a dunk, and most face-offs result in a dunk or a block, sometimes a little floater shot, but by and large a dunk. And so teams can end up getting 3 points for the dunk and then 3 points from the possession that comes after that. So face-offs are a really important part for scoring and a big detriment to defenses that can't control themselves. And it's a big part of SlamBall. It's one of those things that really catches the attention. It's so unique for the sport. You see similar things in, say, ice hockey, but nothing quite like the physicality of a SlamBall face-off. And so I was slightly discouraged to see that it looks like they're trying to phase them out, right? The reason I say that is that the way the league is handling face-offs this season is that any foul that would result in a face-off from each team will result in that face-off once per quarter, okay? Any foul that would have resulted in a face-off after that will just result in points for the other team, okay? It doesn't create a face-off. What it does create is if they were trying to dunk, they get 3 points. If they were shooting from 4-point range and they got tackled while they were shooting, they'll get the 4 points and we won't have a face-off. They'll just get the points and they'll get the ball back. And this was concerning for me because I thought, well, they're trying to phase out a very fun part of the game and a thing that people enjoy and a thing that's memorable and a thing that creates like highlights for years and great commentary moments. And I was concerned that, well, does that mean we're not going to get many face-offs? And that was my immediate concern and my slight gripe. I've already been proven wrong for this reason. It's 1 face-off per team per quarter. So that's minimum 8 face-offs in each game that you could have, okay? And there will probably be potentially that many. I think the reason the league didn't want to have a huge number is because it slows the game down a little bit. Even if they're really fun, it does slow things down. But I think it's good that they have some. And I actually think that when you start to think about it, the potential for 8 per game does mean that you're adding a lot of time. The other thing I like is its inclusion in overtime. So if a game ends tied between 2 teams, the way it's settled is with face-offs, right? Each team picks their best defensive player, and then they will face one after the other, all of the other team's offensive players, point for point, basically. So, tied game, one team sends their best attacking player against the other team's stopper. Say the stopper blocks it. the other team, that stopper's team then sends their best attacking player against the other team's best defending player. If they dunk, they win the game because they got 3 points, the other team got none. But if both teams got 3 points, you go to the next best offensive player and you keep going through it until one team gets an advantage over the other. And I really like that, okay? I really like that in terms of it makes post-game situations fun because face-offs are a big part of it. And like I say, when you start to think about it, the potential for 8 a game, that is quite a lot. Any more than that might feel overkill. And I like that they've still found a way to tick up the scoreboard, I guess. Those are all the rules. If you've come this far and you're like, I still need to know so much about the league, this is a long episode, but that's because this is all the information you need to watch SlamBall this weekend and for the next 5 weeks as we get 4 weeks regular season and 1 weekend of playoff action. So those are the basic rules, the things that I want to talk about as we go into this first weekend. Now we're going to get into the controversial part. We're going to get into my personal power rankings, which should be on the screen here for you watching on YouTube. For those of you listening at home, you're going to hear it counted down from 1 to 8, simply because that's the way that I lined up my notes, and in all honesty, it's going to be a massive headache if I try and turn it around or read it in reverse order. So we're going from 1 to 8, which might seem confusing, but as I say, if you're watching on YouTube, you can already see it here. If you've seen my Twitter, if you've seen my Instagram, you'll also be able to see it there. A nice little graphic that I spent way too much time on, but we move. None of these teams are terrible. I'll start off by saying that. First of all, because who am I to talk? I'm not a former pro athlete. I'm not a former SlamBall player. I'm just a guy who's become way too obsessed with this sport, right? Also, I'm not able to see everything that these teams are bringing together. Sure, I've seen some scrimmage footage. Sure, I've seen some highlights. But a lot of what I'm talking about is based on their previous experience prior to SlamBall. And what you might find is that guys who maybe didn't hit the heights of pro basketball or pro American football, pro football for those that are watching, or world records in high jump and long jump, for example, those guys might even be better on the SlamBall court because of how they've adapted to this game, right? So take what I'm about to say with a pinch of salt, but also take it with enough salt that you understand that no one has done more research into this sport than me unless they're a part of the sport at this stage, okay? So if you're going to listen to anyone that's not a SlamBall member of staff, listen to your friend Sam over here, okay? Now let's go from 1 to 8, right? None of them are terrible. Some of them have more positives than negatives, and that's the key thing, right? Some of them have more positives, some of them are just a net neutral, but all of them are good, and anyone could win the championship. This is the first season with all new players. We'll see how it goes, but this is what I look at the teams as right now. Number 1, we have the Lava. The Lava had the first overall pick in the whole league, and they picked a guy who's being considered as the most complete SlamBall player we've ever seen. The exact quote from game originator Mason Gordon is that Bryce Moraine, playing the gunner position, which is the primary scoring position, he looks like the most complete player we've ever seen in SlamBall. That is high praise. Slight concern there is that Bryce has had a couple of niggling injuries as we've gone through preseason, but he should be good to go for this weekend according to head coach Josh Carlson, and you can hear me and him talk about that in the interview that came out yesterday, plus lots of great other chat with Lava coach Josh Carlson. Bryce being a little bit injury, that's a concern, but he's still supposed to be very, very good. There are some concerns about some players' attitudes in the team, but I think all of them are excited to be there. And what they have as a positive is they have a lot of size, but also a lot of experience. You have guys like Greg Helt, who has been at least trying out for things like the Big Three Basketball League and has been a street ball player and played internationally in South America and in other places. You have Faisal Shafat, who was maybe one of the, in terms of college recruiting for a pro sport, one of the highest recruited guys in the league. Bryce Moraine, we've already talked about, but was a very accomplished college basketball player. And overall, I think this team has a lot of great depth. Maybe not in terms of you can look at them and you go, wow, these guys are all amazing. But you look at them and go, wow, all of these guys are going to contribute in some way to the team. Another big positive for the Lava is that they've not had a lot of roster turnover. They suffered an injury before preseason even really got underway with Alex Dosh, who they drafted in the 7th round, but he was replaced by Faisal Shafat, who we've already talked about as being a really good addition to this team. And since then, the team's stayed pretty much the same. Some of the other teams we're going to talk about have had movement because of injuries or guys just stepping out of the league, and that can create some confusion. Another big thing is because all the teams are owned by the league and they're not owned by individual people, the league has the opportunity to try and create parity and make sure all the teams are on equal footing. And they've been very comfortable in doing that and moving around who's playing where to try and create a balance between all the teams. And to some of them, that might have caused some disruption. Now there's a hierarchical issue. I'm thinking specifically of the Griffins, who we'll talk about later, who've had 2 different backup stoppers brought into their team and moved around. And that can be an issue for some teams. We'll see how it affects them when the season starts. It might not be a problem, but it's something at least worth keeping an eye on. And it's something that hasn't affected the Lava very much. So that's why they are my number 1 power ranking pick. Not much turnover, a lot of talent, a lot of size to go along with that talent, and depth, not necessarily in great skill, but in people who are going to contribute in different ways. Okay, that's my number 1. My number 2 is the Ozone. I see them as a defensive juggernaut. They have a number of different options that can rotate through the stopper position, which is a very big deal in the world of SlamBall. Defense wins championships, and stoppers are asked to do a lot on the defensive end, okay? You can take, I would guess, upwards of 40 hits a night in the air playing at stopper if you've got your timing down, and that can be exhausting. We've seen in other leagues that players who are forced to play stopper for a full game start to wane in the second half, and it makes the offense's job a lot easier for the opposition because they don't have as much to contend with at the rim. I think the fact that they've got 2 or 3 decent guys that could play stopper minutes on the Ozone is a really good sign for them defensively to rotate those guys out. You also have a lot of size on this team, big physical players with length. I'm thinking of Vincent Bowman, who's playing stopper position, the literal biggest guy in this league at 6'9" and I believe 285 pounds, so he's both the tallest and the heaviest. Marcus Gray at handler's a big physical guy, and Donovan Bird, who's playing a gunner-stopper mixed position, is another big player with family history in the league, his dad being the big Sandwich George Bird as well. So you've got size on the Ozone, and that can be a defensive threat, as well as some defensive football-minded players, people like Brian Bell Anderson, who was their first-round pick, son of head coach Trevor Anderson, and Marcus Gray, both those guys playing gunner, handler position, mixing it up between the two of them. They are also defensive-minded footballing background guys, okay? That same size can be a great benefit when attacking the basket and making it harder for the opposition stoppers in the air. If you've got a lot of size coming at them from different angles, it can be hard to stop, hard to contend with, and really physically taxing. So I think that helps them offensively. My concerns for this team are my concerns with a lot of the league. I don't like their distribution. They don't have any guys who are natural passers, and I'm not sure how they're going to spread the floor with three-point shooting. I don't see it from anyone on the team in a big way. But again, I think a lot of teams aren't going to worry about three-point shooting as much as I have in this preseason. Brian Bell Anderson as the handler is a guy that I think you really need to keep an eye out for. I mentioned Bryce Moraine earlier in my preview for Lava. He's the main player to watch out for. With the Ozone, it's Brian Bell Anderson. The guy, again, his dad is the Eagle, Trevor Anderson, and the two of them spent a little bit of time before the season began, even before training began, just going to trampoline parks and just getting some reps in and around the trampolines. I'm told that Brian started off a little bit slow, but in the interview I had with his teammate Keenan Love, which also came out yesterday, basically, he said that Brian is regularly contending with Bryce Moraine. Again, the most complete SlamBall player ever, the youngest guy in the league in Brian Bell Anderson, supposedly keeping up with him, supposedly someone that you want to keep an eye on, and I really am going into the season because I couldn't see much about him when looking in preview stuff, but I've now been hyped up about Brian from Keenan Love, so I need to keep an eye on him. Second pick, Ozone. My third team in power rankings is the Wrath. Now, preface, I picked the Wrath before the season even started just based on name. But when you start to look at their team roster and its construction, they've got punishing size. There's only one player on the whole team that's under 6'4", and they've got a lot of defensive beasts, okay? Christian Gray, who was their first round pick at stopper, he's now a stopper-gunner hybrid, but he is a big guy. Ty McGee and Stephen Julian III, who are playing gunner and also handler position for Stephen Julian. He's doing a mix of the two. They have size and really good defensive capabilities coming from a basketball background. We're not talking tackling on a football field. We're talking about guys who have the timing to make blocks and steals happen. I'm very high on both Ty McGee and Stephen Julian III in this sport, and that really pushes them up. We also have Darian Slade, who up until like 2 days ago was listed as a handler. He's now a gunner. This league loves to change things up on me last minute. He's someone I like from a defensive disruptor / firecracker role, okay? When he was listed at handler, I thought he'd be starting for this team in that role. He's 6 feet tall, over 200 pounds, and he was a defensive player in football with a lot of tackles and some interceptions in his collegiate career at Campbelltown, and then moving on to some more pro leagues. I think that he's going to help with disruption. Generally, they're a very disruptive team defensively, and I think this is a good sign. They've got quite good rotational depth, except at handler, where I am a bit concerned about that. That's what puts them a little bit lower down those other teams we talked about earlier. And it's very hard to understand how good this team is going to be at things like distribution or three-point shooting when there's not a huge amount out there about them. And the Wrath seem to be the team that's the least invested in the SlamBall. Every other team has players that are posting excitedly about, we're doing this as a team. Here's some highlights from practice. I love my coach for this reason. And the Wrath aren't necessarily doing that. I'll try and get some interviews with their players in the coming weeks, just so we can try and understand a little bit more about them. Because right now they're sort of an enigma. And I do like that from the way they're presented, okay? Samurai Beetles, Ronins, quiet killers. It'll be nice to see if that translates to the SlamBall court. In terms of a player to watch, I mentioned Ty McGee at the gunner position. Really good defensive awareness in basketball. He's unafraid of dunking over guys, and he's got a decent shot from distance. So he's the guy to look out for on the Wrath. In fourth, for my teams to note, in fourth, so we're now reaching middle of the pack status, I've got the Griffins. They've got very poor three-point shooting outside of maybe Flash Stanford, Adam Flash Stanford, love a good nickname. And Jordan Grant on their team for his entire career playing basketball, whatever league, whatever division, college, professionally, Jordan Grant always hits 3 shots out of 8 three-pointers attempted. And I love that as being a regular stat as part of his history. But that doesn't inspire me that he's going to do great in terms of spreading the floor with SlamBall. They also don't have any point guards, which is the main distribution position in basketball. They don't have any of those guys in their handler position. They've got some guys who played football, but not quarterbacks. And so I'm not sure what sort of distribution ability you're going to get from that role, the role that is supposed to be making good passes and organizing your offense. I think looking at their team, I mentioned Flash Stanford. He's probably their best option for distribution, averaging 4 assists per game in his last pro season of playing basketball. But he's listed at gunner. And while it's really useful to have a gunner that can make passes in and around the tramp area, what's not great is that you're not supposed to be the guy that's running the whole offense if you're playing gunner. You're supposed to be the offense that's running. And so I don't like that he's maybe their best option. But if you want to move around the team throughout the course of the season, he'd make a great handler and a sizable one that teams would have to contend with. They're scary from the stopper position. Connor Hollenbeck is very versatile. There's an interview up with him on the channel. Weird cut there, but I just choked trying to talk about all this awesome SlamBall content. Connor Hollenbeck is very versatile. He was a multi-sport athlete in high school. He went on to be a very good wide receiver in the Indoor Football League, top 10 in a number of stats over his time with the Iowa Barnstormers. And he's a big guy. There's an interview up with him on this channel as part of Bounce Off, but there's also an interview with him on the Toxic Takes podcast, and I recommend checking out all the different SlamBall podcasts you can find. That's Toxic Takes, and also the Slamcast guys are great as well. But Connor Hollenbeck's big, he's versatile, and the replacement, the backup stopper that they've brought in is another Indoor Football League guy, another big wide receiver, Matthew Wilkerson, who's freaky big. Both of these guys, and also Justin Holmes, who was their first round pick at the handler position, are all Indoor Football League wide receivers, okay? Which means they're going to be adept at catching the ball in the air, which means that offensively, these are a lot of big guys that can make plays at the rim. But defensively, we've just talked about 2 big stoppers that are going to be imposing. They've generally got a varied background from their different athletes, and I think they're going to be scary and tough to deal with a lot of run and gun offense. The player to watch, Connor Hollenbeck at stopper. He really enjoys the physicality. He's aiming to make an impact defensively. He wants to make highlights on the defensive end, and you can see that on his Twitter with blocks that are regularly going past half court, which is very impressive. And he seems to have a good understanding of timing in and around the tramps as a defensive stopper. We move on to the 5th team in my power ranking tier list, which is the Rumble, okay? They're not really able to spread the floor, And a weakness at the stopper position is a concern for me, but the fact that they are the biggest team overall in the entire league, I believe averaging out close to 6'4" throughout the entire 7-man roster, that's what keeps them at 5th and not maybe a little bit lowered down. Their first 3 picks are all weak or streaky shooters from 3-point range, which again to me is going to be a big thing this season. Potentially it's spreading the floor, so I don't like that. And I'm not convinced that they have any depth at the stopper position. Marcus Bradley doesn't look comfortable in and around the tramps, and Victor Dean's got an injury history in the legs, and that's a concern for me just from the outside, that maybe he won't be as comfortable in and around the trampoline area either. So the lack of depth at stopper, big concern for me with the Rumble, but they have a lot of size and a lot of guys who are versatile and can maybe move around. We will see how that goes for them. The shortest player on the team is 6'2", like I said, crazy size, and that adds to having a lot of offensive firepower. Everyone on this team can catch the ball in the air and finish at the rim, regardless of their background. The issue that you'll find is that there's not really, again, similar to my issues with the Griffins, there's not necessarily someone who excels at distributing the slam ball, right? Distributing the ball is probably a better way of saying that. And because there's no one that excels at that specifically, is there someone to make passes to these guys in the air? Is there someone to make passes to these streaky 3-point shooters? Is there someone who's going to be able to take on that role and distribute the ball in an effective way? I don't know if there is, and that might hold the team back if there's no one that can make the right pass. In terms of players to watch, Bakari Copeland at stopper. We've talked about 2 guys who are maybe weak at that position, but Bakari Copeland as their first round pick and 3rd overall. He was listed as a gunner. He's now moved to that stopper position. Maybe that's in line with my concern about the role, but he's a big physical guy. Maybe watch out for him. Especially ferocious dunking. He was on the Harlem Wizards entertainment basketball team, smashed a glass backboard, so hopefully he doesn't do that in SlamBall because we've only got 2 of these things, but keep an eye on Bakari Copeland at stopper. 6th team on the power ranking is the Buzzsaw, okay? They've got quite limited aggression in and around the rim outside of their first round pick in Tyquan Scott and a guy I'm very high on Jamal Barnes Jr., but none of their attacking at the rim is really dunk oriented, okay? Some of it's finesse play, and that's really good for maneuvering around aggressive stoppers in the air, but what it doesn't fill me with confidence in is getting those 3 points off of a dunk. So there's limited aggression offensively at the rim for these guys. They also lack size. The team features 3 handlers ranging from 5'10" to 6'3". That's almost 50% of your team under 6'4" in a league where there's a lot of big dudes that are going to make it harder for you to both get into the trampolines and then score at the rim. In terms of that as well, defensively, they've got a very light backup stopper in Malik Abdul-Haq. He is 6'7", but he's also one of the lightest guys in the league, and I think it'd be easy for him to be pushed out of the way if Tyquan Scott is off the court with Malik Abdul-Haq playing backup minutes at stopper. I'm not fully, excited about that. One thing they have over other teams potentially is their 3-point shooting and that ability to spread the floor. Looking at their roster, again, Jamal Barnes Jr. I'm very high on, 35% from 3 during his career as a basketball player. Devontae Pratt, who I think is starting for this team, again, 30% from 3. These are not wowing numbers by pro basketball standards, but ideally, the sort of peak that you get in basketball is shooting 40% from distance. 30% isn't bad for this league, where a lot of guys were not taking those shots prior to joining SlamBall. Similarly, Tyquan Smith, 29% during his time at college. You've got Tyquan Scott, I should say, don't know why I've written down Smith there. 3 guys who are averaging around 30% from 3 when they're taking those shots. I think that's a good sign in terms of spreading the floor. Do I think the Buzzsaw are going to play that game? I don't, because Coach Planell's mentioned to the Slamcast guys that that's just not how he wants to play the game. Bad sign for me, maybe. That might be why they're 6th on this list. What they lack for in rim aggression, I think they'll make up for with finesse avoiding those stoppers. We talked about that. If a stopper comes at you in the air, it's good to have players who can maneuver their bodies, maneuver their arms in the air. And even if you're not getting a dunk that's worth 3 points, it's better to come away with 2 points than get blocked out the air, right? And that's what I like from this team. Player to watch, their first round pick, Tyquan Scott at stopper. Decent 3-point shooting and finesse around the basket. The thing is, you don't want him to be a focal point of the offense. You want him to be playing defensively. But it's good to have both of those facets in his game. The 7th team in my power rankings are the Mob. Winningest team in league history, a team that, if you listen to my interview with Cam Horton, who was the 4th overall pick, their first round pick, you see a team that wants to win and succeed. I just aren't confident in them looking at the numbers. There's no great distribution on the squad from either handler or gunner position. The best numbers you can see looking at historic stats from college or pro basketball leagues is their only stopper in Gage Smith, who I understand from listening to Coach Kirsch's interview with Toxic Takes, is that Gage Smith was supposed to be playing gunner, but ended up being their stopper because he was also adept at that. Maybe his distribution is going to be really good at the stopper position, and that's important for me. I like a stopper that can shoot threes, and he can do a little bit of that. I like a stopper that can pass. I don't want that to be your main passing guy, if you understand what I mean. So I'm concerned from that. They've got weird backgrounds. 4 out of their 7 players don't have any serious experience from playing basketball or football after high school. But they do have a lot of guys who are jump guys, people who, we've got 3 players in the league, one of which is on the mob, who are part of the Indiana Pacers in-house dunk team, guys who are adept on trampolines and make a lot of impressive moves in the air. And that's going to be great for highlights. Come up against a big stopper, however, you're going to get knocked flat on your arse, and that's not going to be great in terms of, winning games. There's no one just based on an eye test that wows me. Talked about Cam Horton, told him in the interview he's one of the few guys that's showing an aptitude to move around inside the tramps, and that's great. But from the clips I'm seeing, there's no one on this team that's jumping out to me beyond that. Gage Smith maybe, looking at his college resume in basketball, but Cam Horton is the guy on this team that I would keep an eye out for. And after that, I'm not entirely sure. He was their 4th overall pick. He's really excited about playing the game, and he shows that he can move around the trampolines, make assists in the air, which is impressive, but also score on his own. And these are all things I really like from him. The rest of the team, this might be a carry job, we'll see. They do have coaching experience with Coach Brendan Kirsch, who's won the most championships in league history with 2, albeit in seasons where there were only 4 teams. And even he himself was telling Toxic Takes that he doesn't see that as a particularly good quality, and he doesn't consider those real championships, which is an interesting thing to hear from a guy who's been in the league since 2002. And it is something I'll be asking about him on an interview that will hopefully come out on Monday. But he's got experience, minimum. He's got experience, and he likes to play a game that's a bit more finesse-based. His assistant coach is Noah Ballou, who in my mind is maybe the best handler the league's ever seen in understanding how to make plays with the ball in the tramps and on the island. And so those are 2 great minds to learn from. They do have an advantage in the air, like we talked about. People like Cam Horton, people like Darius Clark, people like Cam Hollins, who's the guy from the Indiana Pacers dunk team. They've got a lot of smaller guys who can make plays in the air. Very good for the team, but when physicality comes into it, will they be able to stack up to the bigger teams like the Rumble, like the Wrath, like the Griffins? We'll have to wait and find out what the Mob can do. And my last pick in terms of power rankings is the Slashers. They've only got 1 standard handler, and he's not a distribution guy, he's a high flyer. He is the guy I want you to watch out for though, and that's Tony Crosby II. He's the smallest player in the league, full stop, at I believe 5'6", but he can get a lot of height on the trampolines. If you want to know how smaller guys can be effective, look at Sean Inches Jackson, or look at Lu Feng from the league in China in 2016, who was 5'8" and would destroy stoppers with his ability to follow handlers into the tramps and get a lot of height. So being small is not necessarily a bad thing, but I am concerned about the physicality standpoint from that. He's got good play around the island, and Laubacher, who's one of their backup stoppers, maybe starting stopper, he's got good high school highlights in terms of his passing, but he never really played high-level basketball. So I'm not convinced that there's distribution aspects for this team. I'm not convinced about their three-point shooting. I'm not convinced that they have the size to fight the opposition, either offensively or defensively. I think maybe Brian Gentry, who would expect to be one of their stopper players, is probably the smallest stopper that's in the whole league, and that's a concern. They might be the smallest team on average, and yes, you've heard me talking about spread the floor, shoot threes, shoot fours. These are important things. Equally as important, size and ability to score at the rim. Keep an eye on Crosby II. He's their handler. He's an internet darling because he's the smallest guy in the league, and he's already had a really impressive physical highlight of taking on Vincent Bowman from the Ozone in a face-off, coming out with a score and also flipping head over heels, which isn't great. But he is a guy to watch out for. He is my pick from the Slashers as someone to keep an eye on, but he's their bright spot. And that's where we're at with the Slashers being the 8th team in the league, for my opinion. Go through those from 1 to 8 again for you. I think number 1 team in the league to beat is the Lava, followed by the Ozone at number 2, the Wrath and a lot of size and defensive power at number 3, the Griffins with a lot of great opportunities in terms of stopper, not sure about distance shooting at 4, the Rumble, biggest team in the league. They've got some guys who can shoot threes, but it's very streaky, and I'm not convinced about their backup stopper positions. The Rumble are number 5. The Buzzsaw at number 6 out of 8, with some small handlers, but overall some interesting opportunities from 3 if they want to take those shots. The Mob at number 7, who clearly have something to prove from a coaching and player standpoint, not just that they're good enough to have the most championship wins, but also that they're good enough, period. And then number 8, the Slashers. Tony Crosby II is their highlight, and I'm not seeing much else that I love. Those are my power rankings for the 2023 Summer Season 6 of SlamBall. We'll now get into my other big predictions. Some things I'll have already touched on, other things I'm going to go into more depth. I need a drink of root beer first, my goodness. Big predictions for this season, things that are on my mind as we enter the Summer Season 6. Size is still a key in the sport of SlamBall. Whether you're challenging someone in the air for a dunk, or whether you're playing the stopper position, which I think is the key role on the whole floor, size is still going to be very important. Stoppers in general are a focal point of the game. Defense wins championships is a classic phrase, not just in basketball, not just in American football, not just in soccer, not just in any sport, but especially in SlamBall. Defense wins championships. First ever MVP of the league, first ever title went to the Rumble and the landlord Dion Mays, who was a big threat at the stopper position. And so stoppers are key. Exhaustion in the second half for stoppers who play too long in the first, that is a big, big thing for teams losing, right? An exhausted stopper in the second half of a game who's being asked to play too many minutes gets punished on the defensive end by a well-coached, well-rounded offense that can attack from different angles. If you want examples of this, check out the Slashers season in 2016 China League. Specifically look at Del Monte, who was playing their stopper role. The team was down to only 4 players, so they were all playing full game minutes, and Del Monte was getting punished at the stopper position. Not his fault, he just didn't have any backup, and eventually that catches up with you. And so even if he played a stellar first half, by the second half, he was just getting punished at the rim. So stoppers are key. From a size point, from a physicality standpoint, and then from my personal position, in terms of spreading the floor. Again, I like a stopper that can shoot threes, and I think a stopper that can shoot threes and also make the right pass is going to be a very, very good thing to have in SlamBall this season and going forward, okay? It's going to be a good opportunity to spread the floor and give you an offensive option when you're maybe late in a shot clock. Each team only gets 20 seconds to try and make a shot attempt, and if you've got nothing going on inside the tramps, a stopper who's able to make a shot from beyond the tramps or beyond the 4-point line, that's going to be really important. You assume that 3-point shooting is going to be important, especially with the inclusion of that 4-point line. Like I mentioned earlier, if you're down by 7 points in traditional SlamBall, that's 2 dunks and another score to get ahead. Now, 2 4-point shots, you're in the lead. Maybe teams will get too comfortable doing that and they'll shoot themselves out of a game, which is a common phrase in basketball. Maybe instead we're just going to have a lot of 4-point shooting to win games, in which case that's something to keep an eye on as well. I think that handlers that maybe can't shoot the 3, which there's a lot of them in this league, that could be a difficult thing. I think to be a consistent starting handler in SlamBall, I want you to be able to shoot 3s. Okay, or at least become comfortable with shooting 3-point shots. If you can't, you need to excel at other things, okay? Josh Carlson, when he was a player, wasn't necessarily the best 3-point shooter, but he was a do-everything guy, he was a scrapper, and he was someone who understood how to make plays in and around the island. So having skills like that, maybe having the ability to punish stoppers that aren't paying attention by just running straight at them from the handler position, those could be really good things. The person that comes to mind based on what I've heard about him is Brian Bell Anderson. Yes, he's listed at gunner now, but he was a handler up until this week, and if he's in a position where he can punish an opposing stopper, by all means do it, and that would be a really good thing if he's maybe not the most comfortable shooting 3s from distance. I think this season assists are going to come from everywhere. I talked about distribution numbers generally aren't great. A lot of the guys who you would expect to be making passes and controlling an offense, their peak of assist numbers playing college basketball or pro basketball is 2 assists per game. And that's just not a huge amount. You've got some guys who have had 4. You've got some guys who in international leagues have got 7. But you've not got anyone who... That's like diamonds in the rough sort of thing, right? So assists are going to come from everywhere, and I don't really like that. I want it to be coming from the handler, maybe the gunners, or maybe the stopper. Gunners is fine in and around the trampolines to make plays in the air with one another as a sort of 2-man game, but I'm not sure how great it's going to be. I think it'll be fun, and as someone who loves a good assist, I'm excited to see how that transfers. But I think it's going to be more spread out than being concentrated to the handler role. Okay, whether that's good or bad, we'll find out. Coaching has come a long way since the 2002 season. People don't necessarily realise that, but you do have coaches in this league like Coach Ken Carter, who's been doing it for a number of years. Brendan Kershaw, we've already talked about, winning 2 championships in China and doing very well in the 2008 season as well. These are guys who have learned the nuances of the game. And again, we talked about Josh Carlson being a coach for the Lava. You've got Stan Fletcher, who was considered one of the best players of all time. He's the head coach of the Slashers. And these guys almost certainly are going to be coming up with strategies and schemes to make use of the island, to make use of cutting off and around the different trampoline areas, and not focusing entirely on just give a guy a ball, make him run into the tramps, and force the stopper to make a stop. Instead, it'll be force the stopper to make a decision by cutting off the ball a lot. I'm really excited to see what the new season looks like, because once you get really into this sport, looking at the 2016 China season, it's way more skill-based and understanding of the rules and how to move around the tramps than it was in 2002, 2003. And I want to see how that then transfers to this 2023 season with an all-new crop of players who, up until a couple of months ago, or even a month ago, had never set foot in a trampoline. We'll see how it goes. I'm keeping my eye on the Mob. I've put them 7th on my power rankings. They are the winningest franchise in league history with 3 championships out of a possible 6, right? Some of those are sketch. Brendan Kershaw even said that the team has never won a championship when there's been 8 teams in the league. It's only ever been when there's been 4. And actually, I take it back. They've technically won 4 championships out of 7 because of ones that I don't know how often the league's going to talk about them, but looking at the Wikipedia page, looking at the history of the sport, they have won 4 out of a possible 7 championships. And that's, that's a pedigree that some teams are going to try and come after. The team itself, again, that interview with Cam Horton I mentioned that you should absolutely go and check out from earlier this week, he's talking about they're representing something and they've got to go out and win for the name on their chest and the players that they've represented from the past. There's going to be 2 former Mob players in commentary this weekend in LaMonica Garrett and Sean Inches Jackson. And these guys are a part of the fabric of SlamBall. And so the Mob wants to go out there and prove something. Are other teams going to try and prove something against the Mob? We'll see. I am obviously not high on their championship chances, but I am going to keep an eye on them. I'm also going to keep an eye on the Lava experiment. If you listen to my Lava preview, I had a little bit of a conspiracy theory about what happened to Alex Dosh and the inclusion of Faisal Shafat on the team. The reason for this is because Bryce Moraine, their first round pick, is being touted very highly. He's got a little bit of a social media following. I'm not sure if this is a marketability thing. Faisal Shafat's got a big social media following. Yes, he's an accomplished athlete, but he's also a guy who's been on multiple different reality television shows in the US or game shows that show his physicality and strength, like The Challenge and American Ninja Warrior. And part of me, and I mentioned Greg Helt, who's a guy I'm really high on, but he's a YouTube guy. He's a street ball guy. He's an accomplished street ball player. And with all of these sorts of things, I think, is this a team that's constructed to be the team? Okay, they've got first round pick. They've got Faisal Shafat as a guy who's brought in last minute to replace an injured guy. They've got Greg Helt, who's got they've got a social media following. They've got a coach who, in playing every season of the sport, has never won a championship. And they're doing a documentary that's following the whole league, right? One of the co-producers of the league is the same guy who was a co-producer on The Last Dance and the Redeem Team documentary that's on Netflix right now. They are following the league with a camera crew, and they're making a show about this. You can see some of those clips already up on their social media with a clip interviewing Brian Bell Anderson of the Ozone. So I'm calling it the Lava Experiment because I think this is a team that's designed to get a social media following and be the team that people want to root for. Maybe in next season, because there's going to be 2 seasons of SlamBall minimum, maybe they become the villains if that's the case, but we'll wait and see. I'm also concerned about injuries. Now, SlamBall might not want to hear me talk about this because they tout the fact that SlamBall's injury percentage is very low, comparable to basketball, which is very low injury percentage, and that might be true. But even when you look back at old footage, you're seeing some guys get knocked up. They need to come off the court. You're seeing guys who are getting separated shoulders or need to lie down after potential concussions. It's not regular, right? The presumption from the casual fan or someone who just sees the clips is, wow, this sport's so injury-filled. It's not. You maybe have someone who needs to get attention every 3 games. Is that lower than NBA average? I don't know. Is it higher? I don't know. But you are seeing it. And we've already talked about Alex Dosh not being able to play for the Lava because he required surgery on his leg. Michael Kolawole, who was a big reason that I was low on the buzzsaw early on, he's out of the league with a hairline fracture in his thigh, and this is before we've even started competitive play, okay? This is just injuries around the trampoline. Cam Horton of the Mob and Bryce Moraine, to an extent, of the Lava, are both guys who have complained about slight ankle injuries just getting used to the trampolines. Nothing major, but enough that I'm sitting here going, I'm concerned, okay? And they're not being transparent about it, okay? Unless you're me that's digging into this. The league is not going, Alex Dosh removed from Lava due to leg injury, replaced by Faisal Shafat. There's no announcements of this. There's not transparency there. Will that start when the league begins? If we get game 1 and say Bryce Moraine goes over his ankle and can't play on Sunday night because the Lava play Friday and Sunday, will there be an announcement on Saturday that says Bryce Moraine out with an ankle strain? Or will they just not address it and it'll be up to people like me to reach out and say, hey, Bryce looked uncomfortable at the end of game 1. Are we going to see him on Sunday night? And that's not a bad thing that it's up to me, but I'd like for a league who has monopolised this sport because it is their baby, their creation, their Lamborghini, to use a quote from Brendan Kirsch. I want to see them talk about these things and be open with the fan base and sort of say, this is what's happened. It might not be ideal, but it's what I'd like to see. And if they don't, I apologise to the SlamBall media team, but you're going to have me sending you a lot of emails. My last prediction, Jordan Grant of the Griffins is going to hit three threes out of 8 shots attempted. I wish I hadn't stumbled over that because that's something I'm really finding funny and it's something I'm absolutely going to be watching this season. I might make a little graphic. We'll have the Jordan Grant 3-pointer ticker and we'll see if it goes above 8 attempts and above 3 makes. Let's all keep track of that as we go through the season. Final thing I sort of want to talk about is awards. The league has told me that they want to do a number of individual awards, but they've not come to an understanding of what they specifically want to talk about yet. I, however, am going out on my own limb, and I'm coming up with what I'm calling my All-Star 4 predictions for the league. What I'm going to go through with you now is a prediction for All-Star Stopper, 1 All-Star Stopper, a prediction for an All-Star Handler, and 2 predictions for All-Star Gunner. That's just based off of a traditional SlamBall starting 4. And then I'm going to reference someone who I think is the potential 5th man of the league. Okay, we're going to go through each position from stopper to gunner. I'm going to give you my pick for the All-Star, and then we're going to go through a couple of guys who are maybe alternative options that you can keep an eye on. So stopper, we're starting with Connor Hollenbeck of the Griffins. In his time playing college football, playing in the Indoor Football League as a very large wide receiver, he showed an ability to shrug off defenders with ease. He's comfortable with the physicality, and he's regularly asked to be a physical presence on the football field, and he's doing the same in SlamBall. He's really comfortable with the timing at stopper, which is the most key element to that position, is being able to time your jumps accurately to get in the way of the offensive players. And so I like what I'm seeing from him in that respect, but the hands on the offensive end are an additional thing. I think he can score a little bit. He says that he's being expected to shoot threes sometimes as well. And I think he's going to be a very difficult guy to deal with defensively. And that's a key thing for the stopper. I just think he's a nice guy, and he seems to be really invested in the league. Maybe this is I want him to do well rather than he's going to do well. But I also think there's enough reason to expect that he will. If you look at his highlights, if you look at his determination at the stopper position and his contributions to it already, I think that there's a good reason to look at Connor Hollenbeck of the Griffins and say, this is the guy who might be an all-star stopper. Talking about some other teams, this is not in order of player quality, this is just in team alphabetical order. Tyquan Scott of the Buzzsaw, he's got decent numbers for this league, even compared to handlers. I think he was averaging around 2 assists per game playing pro basketball. And that's a decent number for the stopper position. Again, I like that distribution. We talked about his 29% shooting from 3 when he was playing for Herkimer University, and that's a decent number. I don't think he'll be shooting many threes, but he's likely to truck in the lane, and he's a good option. Tyquan Scott is another guy who may be all-star stopper. Faisal Shafat for the Lava, multi-sport athlete, admittedly 14 years ago, but highly recruited defensive football player. Someone who was playing gunner, has since been moved to the stopper position, and I'm excited to see if that's something that's paying off for him. He's got a lot of size at that position, and he could be a monster defensively, throwing his body around. He's very broad, he's very long, he's a big guy. We'll see how Faisal Shafat fares, but he's another option. And then finally, Gage Smith from the Mob. I mentioned Cam Horton's maybe my favourite from that team. Gage Smith's got distribution and shooting ability that excites me for that spreading the floor thing. He's got good timing, which again we talked about with Connor Hollenbeck as my official pick being a big deal. His timing is good on rebounding and getting steals playing basketball, and he seems unafraid of contact. Even the league made a joke about it. If you look at their press photos featuring Gage Smith, he's the one modelling the Mob jerseys right now. He's got a nice shiner on that right eye, so he's comfortable taking the contact in SlamBall. That's my pick for stopper, all-star stopper, and some follow-ups. Let's talk about handler. My main pick for the handler position is Jamal Barnes Jr. of the Buzzsaw. We talked earlier, he was shooting 35% from 3, which is very valuable at the handler position. The ability to sort of make a play from the top of the field if you're low in the shot clock. He's also got size for the handler position. He can punish stoppers that aren't paying attention. He was originally listed as a gunner, so if you want to, you can have him work off ball as well. But I think if you're trusting him to be the guy with the ball, clearly he's shown the ability to distribute. He's got a really nice highlight reel of dunks, very floaty, sort of floats to the rim, cocks the ball back like LeBron James does. Hard to stop that if you're in the stopper position, unless your timing is precise. And he loves a left to right crossover dribble. This will be good for penetrating into the trampolines and getting around defenders who are trying to get in his way, making it harder for them to stop him without committing a foul. And if they do, it'll be a lot easier for him to score in a face-off than it will be for them to defend. So Jamal Barnes Jr. of the Buzzsaw, that's my guy, a potential handler for All-Star. My other options, Cameron Horton of the Mob. We already talked about him as someone to pay attention to. He's really good at finishing around the rim. He's really good at dunking and elevating and floating above defenders. But that finishing means that even if he can't get the dunk, I think he'll score with finesse. And we talked about his ability to move around the tramps and make passes in the air. He would say he wasn't, he has not perfected that skill, but he's at least willing to show it more than other players are. So Cam Horton of the Mob. And then Stephen Julian III on the Wrath. He was originally listed as a gunner. He's recently been moved to the handler position as well. As he's gone through his time playing basketball, both like at college and then afterwards, he's grown into a more well-rounded player, doing some scoring, doing some assisting, but he's also really good defensively with high numbers for his position in steals and blocks, including getting out to the three-point line and making blocks there. So I think he's going to be a defensive threat at handler rather than anything else. His three-point shooting is worrying, but his ability to distribute the ball, that's pretty good and higher than other guys that we're looking at, even at the handler position. When it comes to gunner, there's a lot more gunners to look at because there's 2 on the floor at any one time usually. I've got a slightly longer shortlist, but we still end up with 2 guys that I'm comfortable in saying Brandon Simpson of the Mob and Ty McGee of the Wrath are two guys that I'm comfortable looking at. Good 3-point shooting from Brandon Simpson. He's unafraid of contact as a bigger guy on the basketball court. And at the position of gunner, he's got quite a bit of size. He's a big guy. He was able to move around the court and get blocks while he was in high school playing basketball. And I think just generally he's someone I want to keep an eye on. So he's one of my all-star picks for gunner. The other one, Ty McGee of the Wrath. He's got quick elevation when it comes to making dunks. He's comfortable finishing over defenders on the basketball court. He's totally unafraid of contact in the air, and he can also finish lay-ins with some nice finesse. Again, good thing for if you can't score on a dunk, you can at least get some 2 points on the board. He's comfortable shooting the ball. He's got touch around the rim. He can make blocks out at the 3-point line, which if you add a trampoline in just makes it even easier to do. He understands timing on cutting baseline while playing basketball, which will hopefully serve him on those cuts into the bottom tramp that we were talking about earlier, and also his ability to go for putback dunks and rebounds. Ty McGee is someone who I think is probably being underrated by most people in the league, and is maybe a jersey I'm going to buy. Talked about that before. I'm technically a Wrath fan. McGee seems like a guy who I'm going to be excited to see. Alternative options at gunner stars. Adam Flash Stanford for the Griffins, adept at scoring from a variety of positions, including finishing around the rim, but his 3-point shooting, it goes up and down. Bryce Moraine of the Lava, obviously he's got big things attached to him. He's incredibly big at the gunner position for today's league, I believe close to 6'5". But there are injury concerns. How comfortable is he going to be starting the new season? Will he have a slow start and then he doesn't get the numbers that require him, maybe whatever it takes to become an all-star? And then finally, Brian Bell Anderson. I've not seen enough of his ability on the tramps. I've not seen any high school footage. He was a college football player. He's likely going to be a big defensive presence, and what we've heard from Keenan Love is that he's going to be good in the air. But I've not seen enough to make a wholehearted thing. But the closer we get to the season starting, the more excited I am about him for some reason. So, Brian Bell Anderson. I only have one pick for 5th man of the year. I think because substitutions are going to take place very fast, I don't really know how it's going to work, but my 5th man of the year pick is Tony Crosby II of the Slashers. Again, we talked about him being an internet darling. We talked about him being the smallest guy in the league. I love talking about firecrackers coming off the bench, and I think his scoring ability in the air makes him one of those. But when you look at the highlights that he's got on Instagram, there's a lot of movement around the trampolines without breaking the rules in terms of when to dribble, when not to dribble. He can set himself up, but he can also get the ball to the correct position. And when you look at the highlights he's putting on Instagram, I said this in my review of the Slashers, I just end up going, dude, like there's a lot that impresses you about the way this guy plays SlamBall. And I think if he's coming off the bench, he's a shoo-in for 5th man of the year. No other alternatives for that. I wanted to come up with rewards or awards for things like top scorer, defensive player of the year, and MVP. But realistically, it's just not going to be possible to do that until we've got a full season of this under our belt. We can understand what makes a good SlamBall player in 2023 and how the game is played in the modern era. I think your top scorer is most likely going to be a gunner because that's what they're expected to do. I think your best defensive player is going to be a stopper, probably someone very physical and big like Vincent Bowman of the Ozone, whose nickname is the Lumberjack. I wanted to slip that in. I think that's your defensive player of the year. It's not likely to be smaller guys, although Darian Slade on the Griffins could make a case. And I think your MVP is either going to be a high intensity scorer from the front court, so your gunner, or a handler that has good distribution, or a stopper who allows very few baskets to be made on him and is able to contribute something on the offensive end. Let's say you're getting 25 blocks a game at stopper and say 10 points per game. If you're doing double-digit points on top of really high block numbers, that's a potential MVP candidate right there for me. That's what you can expect from certain people in the league we talked about earlier as potential all-stars. With all these things, you don't know until they're on the floor, and they hit the floor tonight, July 21st on ESPN and ESPN+. I really want you guys to get international distribution sorted because I'm not the only one over here excited about SlamBall coming back, but I am the guy who's currently having to find a way to watch it so that I can review it here on Bounce Off, and there will be reviews for every single night of SlamBall action. We'll cover the main talking points from all the games, and we'll talk about what players are excelling, what players are struggling, and what we can expect. So night 1 is tonight. It tips off or bounces off or throws down with the Mob versus the Rumble. It's the Lakers-Celtics rivalry of SlamBall. I'm very excited to see it. Hopefully you are too. And if you come back tomorrow on Saturday, we'll have a full podcast talking about everything that happened the night before. SlamBall's back, baby. Make sure you're tuned in to myself, to all the other great podcasters out there with the Slamcast, with Toxic Takes. Make sure you're following SlamBall on all social media. Make sure you're following myself at Quantum Roberts. If you haven't checked out all of our interviews yet, do it. Maybe you'll find a player you love. Maybe you'll find a team that you really want to root for. Look out for the jerseys on Instagram. This league is new and it's exciting and it's just getting started. So thank you for watching to our 2023 full season preview. I've been Sam Roberts. This has been Bounce Off, the #1 SlamBall podcast. Have a wonderful day. It can't